So I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. We're going to go over operator syndrome. We have an awesome panel of professionals here. We're going to let them introduce themselves. Really do appreciate everything and everyone coming together, taking the time today. We know that this is a very important topic. We know that there are some things being done, not enough. With that being said, so we're not wasting time, I'll go ahead and let Dr. Free start off the introductions, and then he can call out the next from there, and so on and so on.
Thank you all for putting this together and inviting us, Eric. I'm glad everybody could be here today. My name is Chris Free. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been working with combatants for about 30 years, both on the clinical and the performance side of the equation. And I spent 15 years in the VA. So if we get into the VA top discussion a little bit, I might have a few things to say. The last 10 years or so, I've been working mostly directly with folks from the special operations community. And I'm a professor at the University of Hawaii. Over to Kate.
Hey everybody, I'm Kate Pate. I have a PhD in neurophysiology and I've been doing medical research in a variety of areas for the past 15, 16 years. And the past 6 or so of those have been primarily focused on military medical. So really kind of research and development for battlefield trauma. So what can we do better on the battlefield in prolonged field care settings? And how do we manage multi-system trauma? And through that work, I have crossed paths with many active duty service members, a lot of people in the SOF community. I've made friends with many veterans as well. And I started to see the other side of the coin with regard to mental health instead of just the physical health aspect of things, and became very interested in understanding that better so I could help my friends figure out ways to heal and help themselves, since they weren't apparently weren't getting the kind of care that they were hoping for or needed. And that kind of took me in a different direction. And so for the past few years now, I've been focused more on the mental health aspect of the military and veteran communities, and more recently more in the first responder communities too. And really trying to understand what is this, this giant problem that we're seeing in these communities. How do we solve that better? And I also am a coach for those communities, trying to help them navigate that health process, the healing process. What are the ways to go about finding information and resources, and just trying to be a sounding board and a resource for others in the community so they can find their way back to, optimal health and functioning. And then I will pass it to Jay.
Well, hey there, everybody. I'm Jay Weinstein. I'm a neuropsychologist here in Atlanta. I'm primarily a private practice neuropsychologist and getting more and more involved with the community here. I'm a newbie when it comes to this, so you guys have a lot more experience with the actual operators, and I'm really appreciative of you including me in this panel. What I'd like to be able to do is take this model of special operator syndrome and be able to interject some principles that neuropsychology brings to the equation. Oftentimes it's a very static thing that I do, which is looking at specific deficits, and it's a very compartmentalized approach. Where I think that infusing neuropsychology into this in a much more multi-dimensional, integrative kind of way will be may well be helpful in understanding all the different facets that you all are dealing with, and maybe I'll be able to get more experience enough with everybody so that I don't have to say you all, but I can say we all. Getting involved. So I'm really appreciative of being here. So, and I guess I'll pass it down to David.
Awesome. Thank you all so much, Doc Gray. Man, I can't thank you enough for allowing me to join in with you. I have just the most utmost respect and for what you've done in your career and who you are and what you represent and like me, what you're trying to do. Also, just I have a long, deep relationship with Dr. Free, Chris. He's saved my life and he's saved the lives of probably 10 of my friends right now. So I can't even think. And then Jay and Kate, thank you so much for allowing me to be with you. I'm a former Navy SEAL, did 8 years in a team. I was a combat medic and an instructor. One combat deployment with SEAL Team 1 in the summer 2002. From there, I got out after experiencing a pretty hard situation and moved on and went to work for Blackwater, where I was an international curriculum development special and worked in Azerbaijan, Afghanistan, and some other contracts. From there, I started my company called Froglogic, Team Froglogic, where my whole idea was to introduce initially kids to work to understand how to battle through the most extreme environments, whether those were physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. And talked to about 7,000 kids in North America in about 2 years. And from there, when the economy collapsed, I went back to work. This time I went to work for the CIA, 2 years training case officers how to more behaviorally integrate with tier 1 units they were cohabitating with downrange. And then I decided to put my money where my mouth is and went to deploy as a close protection and security specialist in high threat areas for case officers. Did that for a couple of years, and my ex-wife said, no more deploying. So I stopped and I went full time with Froglogic, to which I built that business up to where I do about 40 to 50 motivational speeches a year. I've written a bunch of books for kids and adults. I have I had an award-winning podcast with Marcus Luttrell called the Team Never Quit Podcast. We amassed the shows that I was part of about 30 million downloads. And then within the last few years, I established my motivational performance coaching and training. My highlight year was 2018, where I worked with the Oregon State Beavers, who won the Collegiate World Series championship. And then I was in my third year and won a World Series championship with the Boston Red Sox. My main passion, though, for the past 10 years, after going through a horrific first 6 or 7 years out of the teams, battling operator syndrome myself, didn't even know what it was. And then it catapulted me into want to work. And I've worked with about 10 different veteran organizations, trying to figure out the best approach to help guys. And miraculously recently with Chris and his colleagues in the publishing of the operator syndrome paper, I believe that we're on the precipice of being able to finally get healthcare providers and operators the help they need to understand the totality of operator syndrome. So I'm just so blessed and honored to be a part of this panel. Thank you so much. And I'll turn it over to you, Doc Gray. God bless you.
All right. No, I appreciate all the introductions. Again, storied individuals, very professional, and trying to make sure that our brothers and sisters out there are actually getting the help they need. So with that, just going into how the DSM talks about what, PTSD is, how, the majority of institutions out there, they want to find that one thing, it's that black and white, like we're going to put you in this bucket. And what I really like about operator syndrome is it takes some of those characteristics, but it also basically breaks down others. And so you're not, having to walk into the VA. Yep, I said it. Disheveled, your clothes sagging off,
looking homeless.
Someone to basically pay attention to you, because people in our realm, we're not going to do that. We're still fighters. We're going to do our everyday job, and you're not ever really going to see some dude or gal sitting there trying to complain. And so I think now with the new DSM, it's like A through H, and it has all these different criteria. The first thing I want to ask the panel is, what is the difference between operator syndrome and PTSD? I will let Chris, once he unmutes himself, go ahead with that one.
Thank you, Eric. So let me start by giving you my definition of PTSD, which is essentially summarizing the DSM. It's really all the classic symptoms of depression and anxiety, plus fear reactivity. The fear reactivity is very specific to the traumatic experience or experiences. And so the symptoms of fear reactivity would be avoidance of things that might be frightening, avoiding talking about things that might be frightening or distressing, specifically out of fear of the internal response that the individual might have. Intrusive thoughts, nightmares, those kinds of things. That's the fear reactivity. And one of the things that I've seen over and over again with the soft community is a lot of guys meet criteria for depression, and there is some anxiety, but I don't see the fear reactivity. In really just about anybody I've worked with, a few people, but without the fear reactivity, it's actually not PTSD. And unfortunately, that's the bucket that a lot of people use. And so to get into operator syndrome takes a more systemic perspective. And it's not a disorder per se, it's a framework for understanding. It's a heuristic for understanding a way to approach from a systemic level. So you think about the brain, the endocrine system, the cardiac system, the pulmonary system, psychological issues, physical, orthopedic, skeletal, muscle issues. All of that together is really important. And the problem with simply diagnosing somebody with PTSD, if they've got up all these other things, is you're missing 85, 90% of what the individual is struggling with. And how can you help them with the 10% if you're missing out on the 90%? And one of the real problems is how do we treat depression? How do most providers treat depression and anxiety and PTSD? It's with, yes, therapy, but also with antidepressant medications, which are fine if that's the true nature of your problem. But what if the problem is low testosterone, which can look like depression and anxiety and insomnia? If you have low T, Paxil, Prozac isn't going to help you. That's not addressing the root cause. So I think what we want to be doing and thinking about is addressing these root causes.
Let me just hop in real quick, Eric, if I may. The idea that I every day wake up and have these horrible thoughts of what I've done or what I've seen is just, it's nonsense, right? And I'd say 99% of my buddies that have way more combat experience than me on the same level as Doc Gray, when you ask them, are you haunted by what you had to do? And they're like, no, man, I did my job. I got rid of the enemy. That's what my job was. It's more of this sensation of man, I just can't think clearly. My body's beaten up. I've been turned on, and that's the way everybody describes it. I've been turned on for 20 years. And I was hoping, either Jay or Kate, you guys could talk a little bit about when your limbic system is flipped on and stays on for 15, 20 years. Why do people want to call that PTSD? And then what are the profound effects that it has on your brain and your systems, like Doc was saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Go ahead, Kate. You starting.
I was just going to say, I think, one of the things that is so challenging about all of this is that kind of at the root cause of everything, there is this enhanced stress response that occurs with chronic stress. So like operator syndrome, to me, the way I think about it is instead of operator syndrome in my head, it's more operational allostatic overload, which is basically the demands of your occupation have overloaded your ability to respond to stressors and come back to a healthy baseline. It's overrun your stress response system to a degree now where dysfunction is manifesting. So you've pushed yourself too far. There was a place where you could have maybe stopped it and then you went a little too far, right? So now it's this, how do we get somebody back to this normal baseline, healthy functioning? And you see something similar with PTSD. The reason it is a disorder, classified as a disorder, is that you have a normal stress response to something that's traumatic. And if you're able to deal with that stressor or that trauma situation in a way where you're able to fight or flee and remove yourself safely from that event, and you have some sense of agency throughout that process, your stress response system activates to mobilize you for that opportunity. And then it comes back to baseline, and you're back to this normal functioning. But in some individuals, and it's still not clearly understood why some people and not others, but some people during a traumatic event can go on to develop this chronic stress response dysfunction that is basically, it's a stress disorder. Or some people like to call it an injury instead of a disorder. So post-traumatic stress injury, which, you know, if that's a better framework for you to understand it, maybe that works for you. And I guess the idea there is that it's an injury that can be repaired, like an ACL. It's like your stress response system is activated due to this experience that you had, and it stays activated to an unhealthy degree, but it can be fixed. It can be reversed. So for me, the difficulty in all of this is that chronic stress is really at the root of a lot of things. And that chronic stress can go on to lead to endocrine and neuroendocrine dysfunction, which then perpetuates the cycle. And, you know, TBI is a whole other aspect of all of that, but that, you know, neuroendocrine dysfunction is associated with traumatic brain injury as well. So there's a lot of overlap in what people are experiencing. And unfortunately, we're trying to take these very complex and unique individuals and say, well, I have tools that fit inside this box and labels that fit inside this box. And I have to force fit you into something in this box in order to make sense of it and to treat it and to get insurance to cover it. And, you know, it's like this really weird backwards way of thinking about this problem. And so I'll stop there. I could talk about all this stuff for 30 hours, but I'll just stop there and let other people jump in.
No, we definitely appreciate it. What I want to do, because we actually have one of the individuals, Steve 40, I hope I said his name right. He had his hand up, and I want to give him the opportunity to speak. So Mr. 40, go ahead with your question, sir.
So kind of you. Yes, Steve, and thank you, Eric, and thank you to all the panelists here. I want to give you a quick background on myself so you know where I fit in, and as we go forward working on some of these problems, I might have some resources that might be made available to you. You know, I'm a former 18 series guy. And then on top of that, when I had to break in service, I was actually a critical care nurse. I worked at the ICU at the Yale New Haven Hospital System, and then went back on active duty and went overseas. Right now, I sit as the Chief Wellness and Resiliency Officer at the Hospital for Special Surgery in New York City. So when you start talking about orthopedic stuff, my eyes light up because we have significant orthopedic resources at our disposal there.
Go Doc Kelly.
There you go. So BK, I report directly to him, and he is a friend and an incredible human being. So I can go on for 30 hours for him. What I want to talk about, and I think you guys are hitting on everything really perfectly and organically. There's one thing that I think so interesting, and when I hear stuff like allopathic load, or when we start talking about all these different things, it brings me to like the debate between the conversation between burnout, when people start talking about burnout, and they're like, well, no, it's not burnout, it's the moral injury of healthcare. And when we talk about all of these different things, you know, the label, it becomes more and more irrelevant, right? There are metabolic and physiologic implications to all these things. And I'll give you one example of someone that I was trying to decode, and it's obviously not my expertise, but I was trying to help out. You have somebody with, you know, the classic hypervigilance and operator syndrome and a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress from the VA, right? And then what accompanies that, whether it's because they've eaten too much or they drink too much or that their body is in some hypervigilant state, they get an elevated hemoglobin A1C, they get an elevated type 2 diabetes, you know, look, right? And they're suffering from depression anyway. Well, the first thing they do is they put them on metformin, which further plummets their testosterone, which further plummets their depression or exacerbates their depression. This is the cycle that we see over and over. And I think it's interesting because we're going to be seeing this in healthcare as people go through this pandemic, which is where, you know, where I'm sitting right now. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are in terms of the degree of sort of aggression at which we approach these things when it comes to that metabolic hormonal piece, right? We always look towards the, you know, meditation, we look towards the apps, we look towards the psych piece, which is all really important. But at the end of this, I think we're always remiss on looking at is what is the underlying medical depression. And one quick example I'll give, outside the military, I had a friend that was diagnosed for 20 plus years with anxiety and in counseling and everything. And, you know, into her late 30s, they discovered that on EKG with a 24-hour monitor that she had intermittent SVT runs. And that was her anxiety. It was not an anxiety picture. It was a metabolic picture. So I'll leave you all with all of that. And I apologize for the hurling of information, but I think you guys are hitting on important stuff. And I want to hear what your thoughts are.
Thank you, Mr. Forty. And we will let the panel go ahead and approach your question, and then hopefully we can answer that, and you have our information for contact if you want anything after that. Thanks, sir.
Well, I'll just jump in to dovetail off of that, and a little bit what Kate was saying. First of all, Dr. Pate, I'll just say ditto to everything you said. I'm struggling a little bit to add to that, only in this sense that from a neuropsychology point of view, really, TBI and those effects, we talk a lot about that. Blast injuries, wave injuries, those sorts of things. And then again, we really aren't looking at, I just love the concept of the allostatic load. From a brain functioning standpoint, we really don't know much about what the allostatic load, the impact of that on actual cognitive areas of brain functioning would necessarily be. My sense is that the real money is not so much in memory functioning, which is what a lot of time and effort is spent on. And there's reason for that, but that it's really mostly in terms of attentional functioning and particularly frontal executive functioning. And that's something that doesn't really get a lot of discussion, but really permeates, how one navigates through life is really dictated through frontal functioning as much as being able to remember details or your home address or those sorts of things. So again, I'm fascinated to include the hormonal and endocrinological aspects of this into how our brains actually function.
So Jay, just real quick. So one of the participants here, Tracy, was asking about that early childhood exposure and injury and like how the factors, and so you were kind of alluding to that. And so I don't know if you saw her complete statement. I'll read it for you real quick. Is it possible that early childhood exposure to injury, i.e. adverse childhood events, can be a factor in whether or not some people respond to stress better than others in later life? Like their limbic systems are already conditioned to deal with extreme stress, therefore they are less likely to develop PTSD. I'll start with Jay, but then I think Kate looks like she may have some things to say to that too. So go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fantastic question. And my understanding is there's not a lot specifically known about what's going to differentiate individuals, but it absolutely makes sense that early traumatic events, whether purely psychological, whether purely physical, would have an effect on who would be more or less affected by different things. There just hasn't been the research done because there hasn't been a model like special operator syndrome to really understand and view those things. Again, my understanding of the literature is probably very minimal compared to Dr. Pate, Dr. Free, and Eric and David as well. But those are the important questions to be asking. Not only the percentage of folks who are in combat, the number of TBI and post-concussion syndromes is probably what, 85, 90%.
Well, at the tier 1 units, it's all. A friend of mine got rolled out of Dev Group a while back, and because his TI, and he did his own little research with his buddies and all this, because there was no brain protocols when he left. And he discovered that anywhere from 98, 97, 98% of guys at the tier 1 level have massive scarring. And that is a substantial reality, regardless of of what you've gone through, as a child. And I know Chris wants to touch on that, and we're discovering, and, in the work we're doing together, that's a huge component. But if you look at the training profiles, and that's really what needs to be examined as well too, not just the combat exposure, but the training profiles. And there's a guy out there named Charles Morgan, Dr. Andy Charles Morgan, who's worked with special operations units in the selection process for Green Berets for like 30 years, and has some great research on how we're able to maintain for longer periods of time based on that introduction to those types of psychological abilities to maintain under duress, right? And how our biological function compensates over long-term exposure to that. So I just want to throw that in. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah,
Go
ahead, Chris.
So to Tracy's question here about childhood adverse events, ironically, or perhaps not ironically, most of the time we assume that people who, if we use something like the ACEs, I forget exactly what it stands for, adverse childhood events, I think. If we take an ACEs perspective, we would expect most people with childhood adversity, childhood trauma, childhood, neglect or impoverishment of the environment, that most of them would have some psychological problems from that, or many of them would have psychological problems from that. We wouldn't necessarily predict, but I think it's true that a small subset of people that have those experiences become incredibly resilient in how they respond to them. I have seen this over and over again. I haven't studied this systematically, but I've seen it over and over again that the guys in the soft community have a high percentage of ACEs, of adverse childhood events. So it's not rare. I mean, it's common. So in a sense, though, for me, when I first started seeing it, it was like, wow, this guy is really incredibly resilient given his childhood. And there's probably a lot of different ways to think about that and understand that.
Chris, how is that, or any of the panel, how is that picked up, right? So we all go through all these things as we go through selections, and we do sniper school, and we do Halo, and we do MMPIs, and this study, that study, go through SEER school. How is it that, one, yes, they're resilient, but how is it not picked up in those type of environments? And it's not to say that these individuals shouldn't be doing that job. Right? We've seen it. They do it every day. It's like every time I've ever had a psych eval, they're like, your dad's a preacher? Yes, my father's a preacher. The Bible says all kinds of things. It doesn't mean that I can't do my job. How is that, looked at? Which means, how is OS assessed? As we all talked about these things, like, what is the assessment that says this individual has operator syndrome?
I think one thing I just want to add to that real quick is just that in order to understand if somebody's struggling, you have to, sometimes it's readily apparent and it's very clear, but sometimes in order for us to stay ahead of it and not let it get to full-blown dysfunction, you've got to start noticing shifts from baseline, but that means that we have to have a really good baseline for people.
Thank you.
So,
which we don't have.
Which we don't have. This is the crux of it, is that, and we're moving in the right direction. So I will throw out a nod right now to Jeff Dardia and what he's doing at Third Group with SOCOM right now.
Wally Graves is trying it in NSW with a baseline for TBI too. Yep.
Yes. It's like it's a microcosm that's like, it's being tested right now, this approach to surveillance and making sure everyone's taken care of, that we understand a baseline, or if we don't have a baseline, we're really staying on top of these folks and getting them, all types of tests on a regular basis to make sure they're moving in the right direction. But in the future, what I know the military wants to do is, and again, we know it's not happening on a large scale right now because of how many people who don't have this information and who are still struggling, but there are people moving it in the right direction at small scales. And I think hopefully it will expand to the whole soft community and all conventional forces down the road, and then hopefully trickle through into the first responder community too, which would be incredible, and just general healthcare. But we've got to start assessing people before these adverse events happen to understand, like, are you shifting? Is it a little shift? Can we kind of really course correct right now? Or do we need to let it, like, what is that delta where we have to start intervening? And I think surveillance is important, having a healthy baseline is important, and then having these interventions readily available for people where they don't have to hound their doctors or lie to their doctors to get certain things prescribed or certain tests done, because that's what's happening now is everybody's trying to figure out, like, everyone's talking to each other. What do I say in order to get them to do a testosterone test without prescribing me SSRIs? Like, what do I do to navigate that? So I think that the baseline thing for me is
coming off of my team.
In order to assess operator syndrome, we've got to have a line.
One of the questions, in the comments in the chat section right now, they talk about the VAC inquires about past trauma, childhood, submitting claims, and what that means. And I, there's always this stigmatism that's approached with all of us. And Eric, you can say if you feel the same way, but when you're going through all this to come out and say, yeah, here's my baseline, and to give a comprehensive understanding of what you're at 18, 19, 22 years old as a person that wants to be a part of these, freedom fighting, rootin' tootin', barrel chested frogmen. The idea is like, I'm not going to say a word about how jacked up I am on my mind. Right. And then as you go along and each platoon you do, you're feeling the effects a little bit more, right? You've got that good 10-year spurt, and then you start wearing down and you start maybe popping the pills, and you're drinking instead of, 5 drinks, you're drinking 10 drinks. And it's like, man, and and your teammates like, hey, you good? I'm good, and you're like hanging on by a thread. But
that part of what makes us who we are, that childhood,
right. That's right.
that we grew up with. Like the guy who got in trouble all the time, the guy who basically figured out how to sneak around. And I had this thing called the Midnight Roll Express in Texas, where we were rolling people's houses and never getting caught. Like that makes the best operator. So, I mean, like, again, it goes back into, so how do you assess this operator syndrome thing? And then go ahead, sir.
Yeah, let me interrupt you, Eric. Let's talk a little bit about some of the work we've done together and that Jay has done with us in terms of more on the performance side of things, working with a unit, working with a group of operators to help them maximize their performance. So we're talking clinical, but I think there's massive implications for the military. And I'm going to agree with Kate. I love what Jeff Daugherty is doing at Third Group. It's going to be transformational. We've done something very similar, only on a much smaller scale with some of the groups that we work with. But it starts with a little bit of education, a little bit of assessment. A lot of the things that we're talking about, somebody who knows what they're doing can kind of go through and get a quick, rough assessment in like an hour or two conversation. And then over time, you can start putting more things on top of that. You add psychological testing. Dr. Weinstein comes in and does neurocognitive testing. And ironically, Eric, if you recall, the neurocognitive testing proved to be a really great predictor of performance. So we got into the shoot house. The guy who had poor concentration, poor attention, washed out. A good guy, total complete patriot, but he didn't have the ability, the attentional ability, and he almost shot one of our guys by mistake. Just couldn't process. He got task saturated, couldn't process all the information. So, Eric, do you want to maybe say a little bit more about those kind of efforts? Because I think we can use this as a model to help people improve their performance as well.
Yeah, I'll talk about those things. And I think it kind of goes into what Mr. Dale was asking about. How do we get back to baseline? Those kinds of things. And I think what we did with that 5-day program was really just that. And it's also, how do you continue to have that operator do the job, because he can still do the job, but make sure that he is getting the help and treatment that he needs, because it doesn't mean that the individual needs to go away. It just means that we need to pay attention to it. When Sean Mulvaney, who everyone knows does the SGB and all of those things, basically used to always tell me, like, when somebody gets injured, we're just trying to get them back to zero. That doesn't make them better than the next person. So if you give the guy a Motrin while he's in a training or an assessment or something like that, it doesn't make him Superman. It doesn't make her Superman. It just means they're getting back to zero, which still puts them at a deficit. So what Chris is talking about, which was what we did, we took a unit, basically went out for 5 days. Chris set up this awesome, assessment program, but we integrated it with shooting and medicine, and we brought family members in, which is, I know we don't really, get too much into that, but I think Kate was talking about that with some of the things too. It's like these family members are going through this. So really what we did was Chris sat down with each individual person when they first got there. We all knew what the program was going to be. But to kind of get that baseline, I did the testing and things as well. Then we brought Jay in, who was able to do some of those, and I may say it wrong, neurocognitive exams, where we could see if the individual, when he was doing the test, let's say I set up a shoot house open air thing, and we could just see, like, some of the guys were really good, a little bit slow, other guys, based on their exams, you could still see if I gave you 15 different tasks to do within that shooting period, you would see it. This guy was stellar, on point, shooting, and he could remember every single thing. Whereas the guy who had that deficit, and some of it came from childhood, it came from childhood scarring, it came from dealing with things that he was still going through, because we all do. It's not something that just gets forgotten, but we understand when we go down range, when we're training, family comes after all of that. But when we get home, family's still right there in your face. And so I think with that, Chris, that kind of explains, but I'd also like Kate to kind of like reach in there, because one of the things that we really don't do is understand the family dynamic. I can tell you right now, my wife sleeps on the couch half the time, not because I hate her being there or any of those things. It's because I'm kicking, I'm moving, and it's not because I'm having dreams of what I did. I don't even remember half the thing that's going on, but I got leg tremors, I'm kicking, she can't sleep, blah, blah, blah. And yes, there's alcohol involved, there's freaking, like, what helps you to sleep? Did you take your medications? As Chris and I were talking the other day, I was like, hey, I didn't take my meds for 2 days. I could tell that I was like completely off. So I'll stop there, but Kate may be able to kind of like do some association with the family piece to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's important to not only, like, I guess the biggest thing that I'm an advocate for right now is, and Hunter 7 Foundation does a good job of sharing this information, but their whole thing is understand your exposure, understand, like, you as the individual, understand what types of stressors and things that you're undergoing on a regular basis, because the only person who's going to take responsibility to take care of yourself and heal is you. I mean, other people could try, but again, like, you're the one who has to do it. So first, advocating for people to better understand what these exposures might be doing to their body, to their mind on a regular basis, I think is the first part. So educating the individual operators, but educating their families, especially their spouses or partners, because people change, they do change, their sleep patterns change, behavior changes, aggression, insomnia, all memory issues, all of those things, the irritability, hypervigilance, all those things show up. And the partner is like, I can't handle you. This is too much for me. What are you doing? And
it's a different person.
Yeah, it's like
it's a different person. It's a whole different person.
Totally. And they're like, hey, and you shouldn't be drinking, and you shouldn't be, but those people who are dealing with it are like, hey, this is all I know how to control what I'm feeling right now, and to sleep and all these other things. So it's the educating the family, and especially the partners, on what's going on with that, their person, because they shouldn't be antagonistic. I know it's hard to be supportive when your person has changed and it's adding a lot of stress to you, the family member, but the more educated you can become on all of this, the more understanding you can be to your partner, but the more you can help him or her through this process and kind of tag team the healing or the staying on top of things, because I don't think it's hard enough for us to manage on our own, but if we have a little bit of support and get those gentle reminders from somebody in our life, like, hey, don't forget to take your meds, or, hey, I know you need to drink to sleep tonight, but maybe could we try something else, or whatever. It's just the support aspect. Instead of antagonizing the person and being resentful towards each other, it's think about the problem is out here, and you've got two people trying to deal with this problem, and it's not the problem between the people, but it's like, hey, how do we solve this together, or stay on top of this together and make sure that both of our needs are met through this? Because the supporters, the caregivers, the spouses, the partners sometimes feel resentful that their needs never get met or pushed to the side. So that person also has to be vocal too and say, I want to support you. I'll help you through this, but you've got to help me too. And I think the other mistake that people can make is that if someone's struggling, they don't want to ever put anything on that person because it's like, well, they're already dealing with too much. But we can handle a lot. And if you're withholding what's going on for you, that's only going to be more problematic down the road. It's more important to speak up in the moment, and you'd be surprised at what people can handle. So,
well, Kate, I think that's brilliant, right? But you said so yourself in the beginning of that, is that we need to educate people. People need more education. And I think that, that's the big reason why Chris and I are going down this path of developing a course, an online course for both operators and spouses and healthcare providers called Operator Syndrome. We're also launching a 501c3 called Operator Syndrome to fund these research projects from all of you, to build out this course and to have actual assessments from experts like you, and then to bring in real world testimonials from Doc Gray and from the other guys I know, and to talk about how they've gone out and find their own homeopathic solutions that give them the Band-Aids to make it through until we can have a more comprehensive place in one specific location or multiples around, whether it was the Synchrony program at Methodist or home base up in Boston, but remember this is all brand new. So I think the education piece is what we're going to focus on. And when I look at the questions over there, it's like, Aaron and Nathan, they're asking these questions about, right? Well, granted, the operators that are doing current work, we have to focus on them, keep them on the line for sure. That's a lot tougher job, I believe. But the guys out who are tired of struggling, they're ready to try anything right now. And I think we just need to figure out how to create some structure of a program like Chris has already done at Synchrony, and then be able to introduce this to different places around the country, like the Shepherdsman Project in Atlanta near you, Jay, or Home Base, and to say, hey, here is the concept, here's the education, but here are some treatments that we can establish a baseline and understanding of where these guys are. And I'm finished on this. We're getting ready to go 2021. We begin the next 3 to 5 years of all the 9/11 babies retiring. And these are people that have sustained 20 years of combat.
So David, think about it that way. It's like Natasha Kelty, if I said it right, has said, and there's a couple of other folks out there who are asking those same questions, which is really where, ABM, where my angriness comes in. It's like they're trying to ask, like, where do we get this education? How do we know to go to the right places? Things like Chris and Jay and I have already done, where we were like, all we want to do is be able to be a one repository, because what you have is you got a lot of disjointed people really trying to do great work, but there's no one repository, like a one-stop, like the Army created years ago for, I have this, right? And so here's the person you need to see, and then we have all those in a one location. I don't mean like one location. It could be Boston, New York, San Antonio, I don't care, but who's taking charge of that care? And that's the problem right now. I see it, I look at what some of the units, commands, no disrespect to any of them, are doing, but it's like you're trying to put a Band-Aid on something that
they're creating.
Right, that is flowing, and you don't want to reach out to these very smart professionals here for one reason or another. I don't know if it's money, I don't know if it's professional jealousy, I don't know what it is, but that's the part that gets me, because every single one of my brothers and sisters that I talk to, when they read the Operator Syndrome paper, they're like, that's it. But they all can't talk to Chris. They all can't talk to Kate. They all can't talk to Jay. There needs to be a supporting element, one where it's the trainer, right?
Amen.
Okay, go ahead, Chris. I need to get off my box.
Yeah. Well, let me hop up on the box with you.
You get up there, Chris.
Is there room for me? Here's part of the problem: is the VA has
room for all of us.
The VA has a virtual monopoly on research with veterans. I'm a scientist. We're all scientists. We can apply for funding from NIH from National Science Foundation, from DOD, but you can't, none of us can apply for research funding from VA. You have to be 5/8 VA employee in order to be eligible to apply for VA funding. And if I get funding from some other source, which is going to be hard to do because people say, well, why should we fund you? The VA can do this work. Problem is the VA only serves a small percentage of the veteran population. It's probably a little under half. And maybe it's higher than that if you include kind of everything. But in terms of getting primary care and the majority of healthcare, it's a small percentage. The other problem with the VA is they don't necessarily want to know this. They don't necessarily want to support this. It's not their thing. They don't care about operational aspects from the military. So this has just never been a priority for VA. And as Dave said, my close friend Dave said, there is a tidal wave coming. I mean, we've already started that tidal wave of operators. I think right now we have approximately 75,000 folks working in the spec ops space, and they're not all operators, but they're all right there in that space. Where are they going to go for their care? Who's going to treat them? Is the VA going to step up? You're shaking your head, Dave.
No, there's no way they are. Let me just tell you my experience, and I don't give it. VA sucks, man, and they suck because what they're trying to do is they're trying to make me the same as the guy that had one rocket hit his little forward operating base, and now he's done for the rest of his life.
Oh, no, they did the same thing as you, Dave. The same.
Yeah. And I'm like, no. I mean, when I went in, it took me 3.5 years to get my disability. And the only way I did was because of Peggy up in Boston area who helped me get my claim. And God bless you, Peggy. You are the greatest person I've ever seen help us get through the system and in there. But my first visit, and I go to West Palm VA system, which is one of the top in the country, right? Incredible. I think they serve something like 450,000 vets, and man, their facility's nice. It's clean. It's good. People are all kind. I love it. But I went in there, the first 8 doctors I saw, right? 6 of them didn't know what a Navy SEAL was. My orthopedic who did my evaluation, I went in and said, my neck is destroyed, my lower back. And she goes, well, why? And I go, well, and it's, when did it start? And I go, well, in Hell Week. She goes, what's Hell Week? I explain Hell Week. She goes, why would you ever do that? And then I go, well, I had these boats on my head for 5 straight days, 300-pound boats with sand and instructors. She goes, well, why didn't you just tell them your neck hurt and for them to get out of the boat and stop? And I said, what am I doing here? This is insane. And they're like, well, we understand your tinnitus and we understand the X-ray, the one X-ray have, but they don't understand anything else. So
it just goes back into people are trying to do an assessment. It's like one of my mentors always told me, you can't lead what you don't understand. So why are you trying to sit me in a room for 15 minutes to figure out what I did for 25, 30 years? And you don't know. And all you're going to do is hand me a card, which basically for a person like me, us, a lot of folks, we're just like, well, I'm done with you. I'm going to go figure this thing out on my own because I know how to read and I have friends. And so that's usually that's the problem, which goes into, how common for the panel is operator syndrome and SOF. And I want to add it a little bit further because we know we have some conventional units, we have law enforcement, and I know we're primarily considered with our tier brothers, sisters, Green Berets, things like that. But like, how common is it in those types of EMS? Because I think Kate said something about she started working with the EMS personnel and things like that. And like, who's most likely to develop operator syndrome?
Well, I work a lot. I did a couple of podcasts in the beginning of summer, and I had these guys that work for a company. They're trying to drive people to get treatment for police officers around the country, and they were telling me that a police officer, on average, every year of service, they have 7 traumatic events happen to them, and that doesn't matter whether it's Atlantic City or New York, or it's Poughkeepsie, New York, or Kissimmee, Florida. They're going to be exposed to this type of allostatic load. And that in and of itself, there are similarities that can end where I really believe in the questions you see over the side. And I hope that maybe Kate or Chris, you guys can speak to this. You know, these guys are asking about blast level. Everybody wants to know about blast levels. And what is the level of damage that you guys have seen that really has a significant contributive factor for operator syndrome and all of the variable signs and symptoms?
That is a really tough question to answer, and it's really hard because we don't know yet why some people are more resilient. I mean, we know certain things about what might predispose somebody to going on to develop later stage life dementia following traumatic head injuries, as far as genetics go. But beyond that, it's really hard to know because lifestyle plays a huge role. Earlyhood exposure to trauma plays a role. What your stress level is. All of these other things play a role in how that traumatic brain injury or those traumatic brain injuries or blast or whatever that insult might be, how that is able to heal, or how maybe it moves into a chronic inflammatory state. And I saw a question about, neuroinflammation, and TBI leads to neuroinflammation, and hopefully with enough time and the right environment, that inflammation will subside, the brain will recover, and you'll go about your day. But we're realizing now that most people who sustain TBIs, especially in the military, don't ever get the appropriate recovery protocols, and most people just kind of get their bell rung and keep going. And sometimes it's very especially with low-level blast trauma, it's not readily apparent to that individual that they've sustained any kind of injury. So they're not really trying to heal the brain. They're continuing in an operational or a training setting, and they're not really giving themselves that time. And so it's really challenging to know why some people exposed to the same amounts of blast and others, why those two people might end up with different outcomes. And I think there's a lot of variables that go into that. But what we're seeing is that there's much more exposure than we thought. So within the military community, especially within the SOF community, like you guys said, the numbers are outrageous with regard to how many people get exposed to something that leads to a traumatic brain injury or multiple. And some of them kind of, not severe any one, but can be severe in their accumulative effect. And that's really important to note. We don't really know at this stage whether, like in the first responder community, law enforcement, there's been some discussion around, of course, flashbangs, any kind of small explosive certainly could contribute to that. But what about firing weapons, and what kind of weapons? They don't obviously have a Gustav in their community, but they have other types of weaponry that they use.
50 cal, 7.62 belt fed, even 5.56 belt fed. I used to, in my platoon, we carried, in my first platoon, we carried like 6.60s, the old duckbills. Remember those, Eric? The old duckbills. And they, for fun, these guys, Sparky and Lee one would get here, and I'm a left-handed shooter, and he'd be drilling me in the face with his frag, just his brass, and then the other would put the duckbill just behind my ear, and I'd take, we at Fort Chaffee, our two platoons, we shot 450,000 rounds of ammunition in 3 weeks. And the magnitude of IADs we did with belt-fed 7.62 next to my head was off the charts. And every night we'd have headaches, and we'd go, what'd we do? We'd go to the bar and we'd get drunk, and we'd wake up and do it for 20 hours the next day. It's nuts.
Well, you think about I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
So here's the thing. This is what people don't understand. We're talking about, a large part of what we're talking about is a problem of ignorance. People in America don't understand what you guys did for 20 years, 10 years, 25 years in Eric's case. They don't understand, and they don't know the difference between soft and conventional. And my view is everybody who put on a uniform served. They stood up for their country. I salute that. I respect that 100%. And many conventional forces folks do have legitimate PTSD and other injuries, and probably many of them have sleep apnea and endocrine problems too. So it's not about saying some people don't need special treatment. The problem we have right now is nobody understands the magnitude of the blast wave difference between conventional and soft, and the magnitude of the operational tempos and the length of service. People think of 1 or 2 deployments as a lot. How many deployments did you have in your career, Eric? 20, 30? Many.
I didn't count.
more than you can count. And you could probably count the 3 months or the 6
He
months.
forgot after like,
Yeah, TBI.
well,
Well,
those
it's not
guys
Chris.
like Eric, you got to go, how many years did you spend downrange, right? How many
So-
years are you
Yeah.
in a
Chris,
combat?
even
So,
with
like,
that,
let me finish the
it's
point.
like,
Let me finish
Go
the
ahead.
point. The point is we're struggling with a huge ignorance problem. And part of an extension of that ignorance problem is you've got so many people saying, well, we have the VA, so we don't need to do anything more for operators. They should just go to the VA like everybody else, which would be fine if the VA had the services for them. So what I want to make the point that we're not talking about special care for people because they're special. We're talking about unique people with very unique injuries that stem from the inherent nature of what they did for 10 years or 20 years or however long it is. So we should be addressing their needs. We shouldn't be saying, no, we're not going to do anything different for soft because it's not social justice. I've actually been told that by many people. It's socially just to treat all veterans exactly the same.
Yeah, I think there's also, to highlight that, there's also this point that, to the operational tempo part, the reliance upon SOF in recent conflicts as opposed to conventional forces. I mean, the SOF community is getting deployed so much more and relied upon as, the easy button, and that's taking its toll. But, to your point, it doesn't mean that people in conventional forces or even first responders aren't also experiencing the same thing. It's just that the proportion, I would say, Eric, to your question about how many people are experiencing this, I would say the majority of people in the soft community, as opposed to conventional forces or first responder community, are probably experiencing this, to a greater degree than in conventional forces. It certainly happens. And in the first responder community, it certainly happens. But if you remove, this TBI aspect from the operator syndrome sort of description, everything else still, if you're a first responder and you're not law enforcement, but maybe you're EMS or a firefighter, you may not get exposed to the same types of head trauma, but that chronic stress, the weird shift work where you're up and you're, all of those things, what you see, the physical stress, the mental stress, all of that can take its toll. And that leads to chronic stress. Chronic stress leads to chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation leads to endocrine dysfunction, neuroendocrine dysfunction, mental health issues. All of this stuff has been established in the literature that there is a direct link between all of these things. And it's a cascade that is all but inevitable at this point. I mean, it almost seems like it's just a matter of time for folks unless they can stay ahead of it. So I don't want to discount that operator syndrome is specific to SOF and that other people don't qualify, because I've had other people reach out to me and say, I'm sorry that, I didn't participate. I'm not from the SOF community. I feel, awful for even asking this, but I am struggling with something similar. And it's like, I don't want anybody to feel bad about what they're going through because they don't fit under that term. But Chris, to your point, it is a unique set of exposures over a very prolonged period of time at, just a very intense problem that isn't being dealt with in an appropriate way at this point. People are trying, and like I said, their group and SOCOM are trying in a small scale, but it needs to be bigger. We need to be doing more. And I think that the only thing we can do right now as a community is just educate and provide a network of services. Like functional medicine physicians are huge right now, trying to get people in to see them, but where are they? Who do we connect people with? So if anyone is listening to this and they're a provider that would be helpful to this community, we need to start building that. So if I get contacted and I need, somebody needs to go see a neurologist who is used to working with this community, it's like, can we connect each other?
That's what we've been trying to say. I would say at this point, Chris is not only my friend, he's my therapist, he's my, you know what I mean? Like, and so
wait, I thought you were my therapist.
Well, hey, we help each other. But so that's what we've been trying to do, right? To your point, Kate, is how do we create the one stop, right? Because right now, so many people, and what I see right now, our last few questions that we can do, because we got about 15 minutes left, is, Arundel, Lindsey Green, Turner Lapicon, if I said it right, are all asking like, how do I get the treatment? How do I get back to baseline? And these are things that everyone here on this panel has been trying to, but it takes research. It takes coming to one location. It takes community, right? To really like sit down together and stop trying to do these piecemeal things and really get serious about this. Like, what is it that we're going to do? What are we going to say? Yeah, you created a bill that basically says, yes, we're going to treat PTSD and blah, blah, blah. But in that bill, Ms. President, like, what else does that encompass? How do we make sure that these folks who, as we see it, for the last 15 years, Dave, you know what I mean? SOF has been at the front line of all the wars. And it's not because the conventional units and folks like that can't do it. It's just, it takes less money. There's a specialized thing, and we have so many other non-combatants and things like that to deal with. On the same token, law enforcement, specifically like SWAT and folks like that, with all these active shooter things that are going on and the things that they have to deal with.
Crime stats are
right,
through the roof.
Through the roof, right? So how are we as a community, as a nation, and then I'm seeing we have people here from Canada and things like that. So this isn't just here, this is everywhere. How are we going to deal with that? What can some of these people do? What's our next steps, ladies and gentlemen?
Well, I mean, that's exactly why Chris and I are building out this operator syndrome course as a fundamental spot. And then we're also going to launch the operatorsyndrome.org. And we're going to, this 501c3 in our grand vision, right? When I came to Chris and I said, hey man, this is what I think the route we should go, because we weren't getting the buy-in because the one thing here, and I'll tell you, there are 46,000 veterans charities out there, right? And only about 20% of those charities actually do a pretty good service and the amount of money going to the operator. But the overwhelming majority of these things are fishing trips or hunting, or you're going to go on an elk hunt, or you're going to do this little stuff, or maybe a retreat and you get away where, you come into this, your baseline's here, you do this little fun excursion, you shoot up, you have some camaraderie drinks, and then all of a sudden you go back home and your baseline bottoms out. And now all the guys don't even have the wherewithal to climb back up. And that's why I stopped working with all these groups. And now I'm only focused on the facilities and the people that can actually bring it together. The challenge is that everybody thinks of this as so nuanced and so kind of niche-y that they don't want to invest their dollars towards creating or helping to create like you said, Eric, a centralized location where people can funnel in. And then as we all bring our resources, where we have Jay there, where we have Kate there and Chris, and then all these other healthcare, the imaging centers. I saw Nathan asked in imaging, right? Alex Cruz down here with the 22 project, he offers free SPECT scans. And then we send people into down at Nova into hyperbarics, right? Where are all the hyperbaric chambers? Where are all the sleep depth? Where are all the sleep study places? And consolidate. So I think that's our vision, is to create a home for the network to build, and hopefully organically it'll grow out of that. But you're right, Doc. We have to have a centralized place now for people to go, and hopefully within the next 2 or 3 months, we're gonna at least have a spot established.
And I'll just add to that, what that centralized place does is it's not even as much for having a place where, folks come, but it's having a place where people who know what's going on can come together, so that that's a one-stop shop for the clinicians involved or the other personnel. They know what's going on. And so it's not just looking piecemeal at the low-hanging fruit that obviously, PTSD, obviously some TBI, that it's a centralized place that's knowledgeable in all the different realms.
You need clinicians who have a good contextual understanding.
Amen.
Meaning they know what the Navy SEAL is and what it does. They know what Hell Week is. Exactly,
Right.
that's what you need. And just to kind of build on what Dave and Jay have said, it needs to be a multidisciplinary team. Obviously, you need to have a team that has, some core players who understand some things, and that core team probably needs to be neurology, psychiatry, psychology, nursing.
Someone who just doesn't say, "Oh, so you're all Navy SEALs."
Yeah.
Or you're all, oh, SOF is all Special Forces Green Berets. Like, no, that's not how it works. Like, if I got to explain what it is to you, then I really don't want to talk to you.
Then you're done.
As you said
You're done.
earlier, ignorance, right?
Yeah.
I'm done with you.
And so where are these programs? Let's put some numbers to this. We have a small program in Houston Methodist Hospital, excellent hospital, phenomenal team of my colleagues there, Lok Madan and Ben Weinstein, Chris Fowler. They do amazing work. How many guys can they treat in a year? Well, we don't even have funding. So we're treating a very small number of guys because we don't have funding. Program that Dave has been linked to, the home base program in Boston. I think it's a terrific program. I met with some of their leadership last week, General Hammond and some of their clinical leaders, and I think they treated 60 SOF members in their first year of opening up a special track for the SOF community. That's phenomenal, but that's 60 in 1 year. That's 60, and it may be more by now. Maybe it's double that. Maybe it's triple that. I don't know exactly the numbers, but set that next to 75,000. That's the magnitude of the need. We've got maybe the best programs, the best civilian programs in the country treating.
Well, where are like you said, where are all the locations though? So we do have some people doing some great work, but it's also like when I was working at the State Department, we had to try to figure out where all the BSL level 3+ facilities were in the United States for bringing back people for Ebola. No one knew. We had to find them. And so now what we have is a group of individuals listening to this panel who obviously do not know. David knows a couple of places, Chris knows a couple of places, Kate, so on and so forth. But I'm a firm believer, United States, greatest place on earth. But if it's all up in Boston, some people don't have the funds. How do they get there? How do they get in contact with someone? If we created a star-like effect where there's, one in Northeast, one in the Northwest, one in, Florida, over in California, one in Colorado, something that would give individuals the ability to do that. And then lastly, but not completely, how do we keep those folks in the know? How do we continue to serve them? It's not like we're going to give them a product and then never tell them the updates to the products, never tell them. And of course, they would have to opt into that because some people from our community don't follow me, don't track me. But however, in the same notion, it's like that's part of the problem. You have a lot of people doing a lot of great work, but once that person leaves that door, it's done. Yeah. They're finished.
Yeah. I think it's making sure that they're aware that there are options for healing and there are options for improving. And because I think people don't reach out or they don't ask for help because a lot of people just don't think that there's any help for them. And I want to stress that the thing that's great about this idea of kind of a centralized location or hubs is that for, people listening who are asking the questions, like there are tools that we have, medical tools that aren't based in, it's not SSRIs, but, maybe hormone replacement therapy or anti-inflammatory diet or supplementation or, certain things where we have tools that we know can correct and address some of these things and help you heal. We know how to do that with the right team. So it's not like we're just like get people together and just tell you how bad you are. It's like, no, we will fix you too, but we've got to get those people together in order to do that. And I think people just don't think, like a lot of guys I talk to are like, I just don't like, I'm broken and that's freaking it. Like that's it. And that's not true. It's not true at all. And if they knew that, they might be more inclined to reach out and ask for help because they're not going to get shoved, into cognitive processing therapy and put on SSRIs. It's like, hey, we're actually going to do all these baseline tests. We're going to acknowledge that what you're experiencing is legit. And we're going to come up with a multidisciplinary treatment plan that has been tried and true, and we may have to tweak it because you're unique and you're gonna have some things that may not work for you, but we're gonna like keep track. And as things update or become more readily available, or legal treatments or something like that, then we can continue to help you. And I think for me and my own perspective, not to mention the guys that I've talked to, if I knew that was an option and it was like a surefire way to improve myself and to get better, I would absolutely ask for help when I may be less inclined otherwise. So,
and the quickest,
Amen.
most practical thing that I've said to people is, if nothing else, take the operator syndrome paper to your primary care doc, whoever your primary care provider is, sit down with them, show them, spend 5 minutes educating them about what you did and how you've been affected, show them the paper, highlight the paper, circle the things that you're concerned about, go in with that, and then work the list.
Chris,
Amen.
like what you say too, and luckily for me, I had a great doc when I retired. And there are great doctors in the military. I work with some of the best that are out there. However, my doctor when I retired, who was not military, knew nothing about the military, took my medical records and went from the time I was a private in 1988 all the way until I retired in 2013. And basically he came up with my master problems list and said, they missed this was missed. This is like, and that's how I started really getting help, was because, while you're in, there are some things that you will tell people. There are a lot of things that we won't, because in the units that we all come from, we know it, the Rangers, the SEALs, the MARSOC guys, you're not telling anybody what's wrong with you, because, and I'm talking physically or mentally, because that means you may not be able to go on that deployment. You may not be, and they're going to look at you differently than they would if you just, back in the day, you didn't tell people what injuries or whatever you had. You just sucked it up and you did the job. Mental, toughness. Now with that, I really don't want to cut this off. This panel has been absolutely phenomenal. We are, 5 minutes left of this thing, and we could talk forever. Perhaps maybe, we'll do this again at some point in time, maybe, just kind of follow on with this. I will give each one of the panel members, a minute to say their last thoughts. And then we thank everyone for joining in. We know that this was part of your time through in the middle of the day, but we figured this was the best, opportunity for us to bring to light something that we all is near and dear to each one of our hearts. I will be a gentleman and a scholar, and I will let Dr. Pate say her last piece first.
Thank you so much. This has been a great pleasure. I really appreciate sharing this panel with you guys. I've learned a lot, and just appreciate everything that you guys have contributed. And to the community listening, all I would say, and what I'll leave you with, is just to know that there are ways to heal through all of this. And it does require a little bit of legwork at this point, and we're working on building out a bigger community, so it's easier for you to get the care that you need. But please reach out to any of us or to anyone else if you're trying to find ways to heal. It might take a little bit for us to connect everybody and get you in the right place and with the right team, but absolutely, that's my passion in life, is to just find ways to help people heal themselves. So I'm always here to be a resource to people, and I just want people to have hope and know that there's a way through all of this and getting better and being strong. So thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Rutherford.
I just want to say, if you're an operator listening, don't kill yourself. My good friend, Dave Hall, killed himself back in September. I had reached out, another friend of mine had reached out and said, hey, Dave's struggling. Can you talk to him? I did. I reached out. He said, I'm pretty good. I just went through rehab. I'm trying to get my stuff. I'm going home. I'm good. And I took that and I shouldn't have, because I've heard it so many times now. Dave is the 11th close friend I've had that have committed suicide in the last 10 years from this. And if you are having suicidal inclinations, at a minimum, call one of us, get in touch with one of us. We will put you in contact, or call a battle buddy, call somebody that you went through training with, that you trust with your life, and just be patient and stay with it, man. Don't kill yourself, please.
Thank you, Mr. Rutherford, and very important message. I too have folks out there like that, and so I definitely agree with that. Mr. Weinstein, doctor.
Well, thanks again. Thanks again for having me as part of the panel. I'll tell you, I'm really encouraged by what is available. I can understand the frustration and not being understood, and there being a variety of different things that people are going through that nobody's looking at and paying attention to. But I'm really encouraged by what this all is leading toward. And it does. It just hang on. It just takes a little bit of time. Takes more time. I know that's frustrating too, but these things, we never would have had a panel like this before to incorporate these different ideas and the different things that are involved in this, that it's not just the obvious one or two things that have been focused on in the past that then don't always completely help or don't help enough. So I'm very encouraged by it. And again, I thank you all for including me.
Doctor, wonderful gathering, Doctor. Chris?
Well, I'll be real quick here. You guys have pretty much said it all. I'm just going to agree. Don't kill yourself. Don't give up hope. There is hope, and you're not broken. It's time to recover. And if nothing else, educate the people around you who matter. Your spouse, your children, if that's appropriate, your care provider, and go from there.
Lastly, I will say, again, thank you to the panel. Thank you to those who listened. We had some great comments, some great injections. And yes, like David said, Kate has said, Jay, Chris, if you have issues out there, you don't want to talk to people, if you go look Froglogic up, if you go look up Gray Ghost Solutions, you will see email addresses, phone numbers. Call us. I mean, we are entrepreneurs. We don't have a lot, but I will give you the shirt off my back and a place to stay if that's what it's going to take for you not to take your life. We're all in the same boat. I promise you. Don't always let the book cover determine what you think is going on with an individual. Okay?
Amen.
Amen.
With that, we'll sign off, and we appreciate everyone's participation and joining us.
God bless.
Next time.